The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Leng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are doing something a little bit different here at The Whisper in Darkness. This is the August Q&A episode in which I answer questions submitted to the channel by Patreon supporters. I've wanted to start up this sort of segment for some time, and I'm looking forward to seeing what sorts of questions the patrons come up with in the weeks and months ahead. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank them for their tremendous support over the past few months. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you this Q&A session, as well as news reviews and playthroughs for the Arkham Horror LCG. If you would like to become a patron and support the channel's goals, which include picking up some art to refresh the channel's look a little bit, and hopefully get a custom Man from Leng investigator made, and you can submit your own questions to the monthly Q&A. Follow the link down below. Sign up for a tier and claim your reward. That would be awesome. Hello everyone, glad you could join me today. We've got a bunch of questions to answer from patrons this month, so we're going to jump right in. Before we do that, I wanted to address one question that came in from one of the comments on my recent playthrough of The Wages of Sin. At some point during the game, I advanced the act deck during the enemy phase, and some players took exception to that, saying that it was not permitted by the rules. The only time that you can advance the act deck is during the investigation phase. That is not correct. The rules in the rules reference on page 3 under Act and Agenda deck do allow you to advance the act deck during any player window because it is a free triggered ability. This, I can understand why there is some confusion, because under on page 7 of the rules reference, there is a under clues, there is it does state that investigators may advance during the investigation phase by spending clues, as long as there is no objective preventing them from doing so. I think part of the confusion is that the advancing the act deck during the investigation phase is a holdover from the Learn to Play rules, and is not. And the Learn to Play rules do not discuss player windows in any way, shape, or form, which I think is a bit of an oversight. However, the rules reference does embrace the idea of player windows and does allow you to advance the act deck during any player window. I've talked to designer Matt Newman about this, and he has confirmed in an email to me that that this sort of thing is allowed. And if you have been advancing the act deck solely during the investigation phase, you may want to consider looking at other player windows in other phases. Sometimes it can be very advantageous to advance the act deck at different times, especially if you expect an enemy to spawn. You can advance it after the enemies have moved, so the enemy will spawn, and then it will, especially if it's a hunter, it won't be able to move after you that particular turn. So you're able to buy yourself a little bit of time. It depends on the scenario, but sometimes there can be advantages to doing so. Now, this of course is only if there is not some sort of objective that you have to fulfill. This is only usually if the act deck just says 3 clues per investigator, say, and doesn't have any objective that you need to fulfill to advance the act deck. Otherwise, you are free to advance the act deck whenever you want, as long as it's during a player window, during any phase. I just wanted to address that because this question has come up on the channel before, and I thought it would be a good idea during a Q&A video to address this this sort of one of these little rules things. I think if they were to redo the rules reference, they might take out that reference under clues, because I think that text is a holdover from the Learn to Play rules. And as designer Matt Newman has made clear. The rules reference takes, the learn to play rules are basically there just to get you started. And then once you move on to the rules reference, those rules should take priority. All right, with that question out of the way, let's get to our Patreon questions. Robert Bout asks, what are the dates and ticket availability for Arkham Knights 2019? For those of you who may not be, who are just new to the game, Arkham Knights is Fantasy Flight Games' annual event dedicated to its Arkham Files product line, namely the Arkham Horror LCG, Arkham Horror, Mansions of Madness, Eldritch Horror, and Elder Sign. FFG recently announced that the latest game in the line, Final Hour, will be released later this year, so I expect it to be available for demo as well during Arkham Knights. Now, while nothing official has been announced, there have been multiple unofficial sources that have pinned the date for Arkham Knights 2019 as being October 11th and 12th at FFG's Event Center in Roseville, Minnesota. This is a little earlier than last year. Last year it was a little later in October, but I think there is a conflicting event. It may be Destiny Championships or something like that that is taking place in Minneapolis, so the staff won't be available. So I think they're moving Arkham Knights up a week or two to a better window. So if you're free during, if you're interested in attending Arkham Knights, it looks like October 11th and 12th is going to be the dates for that. Now, tickets for last year's event cost about $75 US, and they went on sale in mid-September, so I'd expect some sort of announcement from FFG in the next couple weeks. Last year, the tickets went on sale very quietly. It was only via a post on the Mythos Busters Discord server that I knew that they had gone on sale. And then I think it was a week or two later that they were officially announced on the FFG site. So if you're interested in getting a heads up and you're not signed up to the Mythos Busters Discord server, I would head over and do that, and they will keep you abreast of when those tickets are available. Now, I think the event does sell out. It's I don't think it sells out very quickly, but it will sell out. So if you're planning on attending, you should definitely pick up your tickets as soon as possible. Now, there are a couple of events that are worth noting if you are a fan of the Arkham Horror LCG. Friday night, that would be the 11th, usually features some sort of standalone scenario. Last year, it was Guardians of the Abyss, which had been released during Gen Con 2018. And I think this year it will be the players will have a chance to get their hands on The Blob That Ate Everything, which was the standalone scenario unveiled at Gen Con 2019. Lots of people will play that scenario as well as other Arkham Horror Files games. The big event on Saturday is the unofficial Iron Man event organized by the fine folks over at Mythos Busters Discord server. During this year's Iron Man event, players will tackle the entire Forgotten Age campaign in a single day. Basically, you arrive when the FFG Event Center opens at around, I think it's 10 or 11 in the morning. You throw down your cards and you start playing, and you usually don't finish until the goal is to finish the entire campaign before FFG's Event Center closes, which I think is around midnight. Now, I had a chance to participate in the Path to Carcosa Iron Man last year with my team, and while we fell just short of victory, we went down to defeat during Black Star's Rise. An Ancient Evils advanced the act deck on us, and we were defeated. I had a blast. It was a great deal of fun. It's a long day of Arkham Horror LCG, but it's actually felt a little more manageable than I had anticipated. There were times to grab some food and time to take some breaks, and so it wasn't too bad. but it can get tiring towards the end, and you can start making bad decisions occasionally. Now, if you're interested in playing in this year's Ironman event, the organizers have already posted a sign-up sheet over at the Mythos Busters Discord server. You can sign up with a team of 4, or you can just sign up as an individual. And if you don't have a team, you will be assigned a team. I believe they are going to be assigning teams on September 22nd. And that will give you plenty of time to sit down with your team and plan your attack against the Forgotten Age. Usually you have your decks built well ahead of time. You have all of your upgrades and purchases chosen, so and all of the scenarios pre-constructed. So you basically, as soon as you know how much experience points you've earned, you just slap those cards into your deck and away you go on the next scenario, which is usually set up as soon as while you're tearing down the other one. Now, I believe that this year's participants have a chance to pick up a custom Mythos Busters playmat. The price will be about $15, and so you can head over to that sign-up sheet and sign up and say whether you want to purchase that playmat or not. Last year they had some awesome T-shirts that they offered, so I expect the playmat is going to be amazing, and it's going to be one of those great purchases. I'll leave a link to the sign-up sheet in the notes down below, so you can just head over there if you are interested. Now, speaking of special events, I should mention that my co-hosts over at the Great Old Ones Gaming Podcast are organizing a day of Arkham Horror in Portland, Oregon on Sunday, October 27th. The event is going to take place at Guardian Games from 12 to 8 p.m. Tickets are $5, and the events planned include the Blob That Ate Everything, Labyrinth of Lunacy. There is a Depths of Yoth challenge in which you try to go as deep as you can during that scenario, as well as fan-made scenarios. Nathan is a big fan of those fan-made scenarios, so if you have ever wanted to give some of those a try, this would be a great event to do so. And I'm sure they have all sorts of other great events planned. If you're looking for more information about this event in Portland, head over to the Arkham Horror LCG Facebook page. I know Nathan posted something over there yesterday, and you can also drop by and talk to him directly over at the Great Old Ones Gaming Discord server, and I'm sure he would be happy to answer any of your questions. Patron Chris Collins has several questions he submitted. His first one is, what are your thoughts on Diana Stanley now that you've had a chance to play a few games with her? Is she a slow burn like other Mystics? I have been playing Diana quite a bit since the Circle Undone released. I played her at there was an event in Edmonton. I played her with, I had a chance to play with Scott from over at Mythos Busters. I played the version of the deck that uses Eat Lead and the 45 automatics to try to cancel chaos tokens. I've been playing, if you've been watching the games I've been posting, I've been playing this other Diana Stanley deck that relies heavily on cancels, as well as the allies, David Renfield and Alyssa Graham, as well as St. Hubert's Key. There are several other Diana builds out there. I saw one by Start With a Name, one of the preeminent deck builders in the community that takes a different approach. It uses cards like Sixth Sense he ramps up Diana's willpower and then investigates using cards like Sixth Sense and Rite of Seeking. And Chris pointed me to a deck by Matastrophic that relies heavily on events and very few assets, basically just an enchanted blade. I think that deck may have been a little bit older, probably created when the game was first, when the deluxe expansion first came out. But yeah, there's a lot of different Diana builds. The one I'm playing in particular, I think Diana is slightly better than some of the other Mystics I've played during the Forgotten Age cycle. I played a lot of Father Mateo, and I found him to be quite slow at times. He could certainly pull off very good victories against those early scenarios in the Forgotten Age cycle. Unfortunately, those victories were few and far between. More often than not, it just seemed like I couldn't get set up fast enough in order to make any real headway. I think the biggest problem with the Mystics is that they are very resource intensive. They are very similar to Guardians in that way. They have a lot of expensive assets. St. Hubert's Key costs 4. Alyssa costs 4. Shriveling costs 3. You can see a trend there. There are a lot of expensive assets that they can purchase, and so it can take some time to get all those assets down on the table. Mystics tend not to have a great intellect. Diana is fairly average at 3. I believe Father Mateo is also a 3. So they can be a little slower when investigating, especially if they have to investigate without any sort of tricks like a flashlight or their Rite of Seekings and whatnot. It can be very slow going. Now, Diana she is an unusual mystic in that she has a willpower of 1, and so you have to build up to get her to be, you can get her, I think, up to 5, 6, 7 with the right combination of cards on the table, at which point she becomes extremely powerful. A lot of the encounter cards that rely on those willpower skill tests, they are unable to crack that willpower. And of course, you've got cards like Shriveling, which become, I think, if you upgrade to Shriveling 3, it can make a big, that you get that +2 on top of the 6 or 7 you're already rocking in terms of willpower. So she can be very good once she gets going. She does seem a little faster than the other Mystics I have played. She has, I think she has a few more tools than Mystics used to. One of the biggest problems Mystics used to have is that basically they had Shriveling and nothing else in terms of offensive cards. I mean, you've got Knife, but that's not really great. Mystics have improved with the release of the Circle Undone cycle due to the release of cards like Wither. That gives them another offensive option. Diana has access to the Guardian card pool, which is great. So she can take Machete if you happen to be ignoring the list of taboos. Which gives her a few more options. There are several weapons in the Guardian card pool, as well as cards like Prepared for the Worst that let you search for them. So she is able to defend herself a little bit, I think, easier than some of the other Mystics could, at least in before the release of the Circle Undone. Now, I feel like I have struggled with Diana in this campaign. I am not sure whether that is an issue with the campaign itself, or the fact that Diana's weakness is Indebted, and she also opted to take the Tower weakness and that Ace of Rods. I think between Indebted and the Tower, that's 6 resources that you're basically losing. You start with 2 fewer resources due to the Indebted, and then if you happen to draw the Tower, you need to pay 4 resources to get that thing out of your hand. So that's 6 resources that Diana needs to come up with. You need to fill that hole, and that is pretty tough, I've found, unless I've been able to pull to get David Renfield down on the table. Now, David is amazing if you've got enough. The Doom threshold is long enough that you can ramp him up. But there are some scenarios where there just isn't really enough time for him to do the job that he needs to do. You can also try to kill him, but that's before the agenda advances. But that can be easier said than done sometimes. You're really relying on the encounter deck to do that for you. And if the encounter deck doesn't cooperate, you're going to have a ton of resources, but you're also going to fly through the agenda deck. Now, if you've watched my playthrough of The Wages of Sin, which I posted earlier, I did actually have to switch to David. I had Alyssa on the table, and then I swapped over to David because I was simply so resource starved. I had, I believe I had my Enchanted Blade I needed to play. I had the tower I needed to get down. I had, I believe there was one other card in there that I needed, probably St. Hubert's Key, in order to deal with some of those heretics. So it was very slow. I managed to get David down and ramp up my resource generation, at which point it wasn't an issue. But yeah, I think in this particular deck, due to the combination of Indebted and the tower, that resources are a bigger issue perhaps than they would be for another Mystic Investigator if you were playing it through this particular campaign. Otherwise, I do quite like Diana. I do like playing I do enjoy having the choice of canceling cards. I find there's a lot of really interesting decision points that you have to make during the game, especially playing through the Circle Undone cycle, because there are so many of those encounter cards that target your threat area. So trying to decide which ones to cancel and which ones to leave can be nail biting at times. It's not always clear cut. I think there are things like that Treachery Bedeviled, which prevents you from using any of the action triggers in cards you control, or Racked. I think those are pretty much auto cancels if you can do it. But then you've got some of the other ones that could potentially be very problematic later. I believe like Evil's Past will inflict 2 horror if the encounter deck runs out of cards. That can be pretty bad for Diana, especially if you're playing the double Arcane Research version that I am, and you are unable to heal some horror. That could be potentially bad. So I do enjoy having those decision points, and I feel that she's got the tools to succeed. Her Investigate is not great at 3. It's just average, and that's probably the other problem I found during the Circle Undone, that the Shroud values seem to be a little more aggressive than they have been in past cycles. You're seeing a lot of 3s and 4s, which is very tough for an average intellect investigator to deal with. And so Diana really needs her tools, like I'm playing Flashlight, for instance, also Perception. I need that St. Hubert's Key in order to boost up her intellect, in order to deal with some of those locations. Chris also asked, what are your thoughts on the Circle Undone campaign? Is it my imagination, or is this campaign easier than the others? Well, judging by my playthroughs so far of the Circle Undone scenarios, I would be very hesitant to describe this campaign as easier. I haven't thought a great deal about the prologue since I played it way back when. I don't even bother playing it these days. I'll just make up a number and go with it. It's just not a very interesting scenario to me. I find a lot of the scenarios in this cycle are reminiscent of, they're sort of tuned versions of previous scenarios that we've seen. For example, the Witching Hour is very similar to the Gathering towards the end, when you've got all the witches flocking to that one particular location. At Death's Doorstep is very similar to, seems a little bit like The House Always Wins, if you're trying to, I forget what his name is, to escape the Clover Club with that ally that you pick up. His name escapes me at the moment, but that's similar to having to go fetch Joseph Miger and lead him to safety. The Secret Name reminds me a lot of. It's easily the longest scenario. I think that one took me 21 turns. That one seems like it's almost got there's too much in it. It feels like there's 2 scenarios worth of material crammed into one. And so it's a very long scenario. I have played it multiple times since my first playthrough, which ended very badly. And I've been only able to reach the site of sacrifice once, and even then I was only able to get R1. So it didn't go very well. And as for the Wages of Sin, it's very reminiscent of scenarios like the Midnight Masks or Undimensioned and Unseen, where you have a group of enemies such as cultists and or broods of Yog-Sothoth that you are attempting to defeat. You're just trying to defeat as many as possible before time runs out. In this case, you're trying to gather as many heretics as you can before time runs out. I think the biggest difference between the Wages of Sin and some of those other scenarios like the Midnight Masks and Undimensioned and Unseen is that the map is incredibly small. When the scenario was previewed, I expected it to be quite a bit bigger, and it is very tiny, and there is not a lot of room to hide on that map, especially once they all flip to their spectral locations, and you've got the Spectral Watcher to deal with. You've got some of the other enemies in that spectral deck coming out to chase you. That can be very difficult. Whereas if you were playing, say, Midnight Masks, you have a lot more room, and in fact, you can get into positions where you can simply run the hunters in circles while you carry on. You don't have to worry about them too much. The same with Undimensioned and Unseen. There's a little bit more of... You have a bit more flexibility there in where you can go. In fact, the big map in Undimensioned and Unseen can almost sometimes work against you because the movement of those broods of Yog-Sothoth are so random in nature. It can be difficult to, when you're finally in a position to kill one, to finally track one down and actually put it down. Now, I haven't played the rest of the scenarios yet in the Circle Undone. I'm saving those for blind playthroughs that I will be making my way through in September. But I have heard that Union and Disillusion is very difficult, perhaps even a little too difficult. It might be tuned a little too much, and I've also heard the final scenario before the Black Throne is challenging as well. But that's, I guess, to be expected, considering it is the final scenario in the campaign. So overall, I am enjoying the cycle so far. I have played The Witching Hour several times. I did enjoy Death's at Death's Doorstep. The secret name, that is a bit of a problem for me, because it is a very long scenario, and I'm not entirely, having not played the entire cycle yet, I'm not entirely sure it's worth the time that you put into it. Like, the reward simply isn't worth all that time that you put into it. I think you need to be able to, victory points, you need to be able to get to sort of the second stage of that scenario so you can start to clear some of those locations. But I think you get some mementos or something like that if you're able to defeat it. And I'm just not sure whether they play how much of a role they play later on. But that will be I'll be able to figure that out as I go through the cycle more, and I get a better sense of how it flows. But I think the secret name is going to be, it's one of those, I hate scenarios that serve as obstacles to playing a campaign, and it seems every campaign has one. In the Dunwich Legacy, Undimensioned and Unseen for me is a tough scenario to get over, simply because it really requires a specific type of investigator, that being one with extremely high willpower, in order to succeed. The Path to Carcosa, it can be tough if you're... that one's actually is pretty okay. The only scenario that sort of gives me pause is a Phantom of Truth. If you end up having to to survive the night. That can be a long scenario, especially in 4-player. However, usually I play mostly solo, so it doesn't bother me too much. The Forgotten Age has several very tough scenarios in it, but for me, Boundary Beyond is a real stumbling block, simply because it is a very difficult scenario to do well in, and you really need to do well in it in order to have a chance later on during the campaign. It does set you up for what happens in Heart of the Elders, and Heart of the Elders can be very long as well if you run into some bad luck in Boundary Beyond and you don't have any of the I forget what they're called, the keys to the cave entry or whatnot. So it can be very very long, and it just doesn't. I don't like playing scenarios that take an extremely long time to finish. I would rather just, if I'm going to sit down and play, I'd rather play a bunch of shorter scenarios. So it'll be interesting to see how they do this in the Circle Undone, in the Dream Eaters cycle, where they're going to have sort of 2 mini campaigns going at the same time, each with 4 scenarios. But you could also play that in a big 8 scenario campaign. I'm looking forward to seeing how they handle that, and whether they're able to sort of smooth it out a little bit. But as for the Circle Undone, so far I think playing the Secret Name is going to be a tough one for me. So, but we'll see. Who knows? Maybe I'm not averse to difficult scenarios. I do enjoy playing difficult scenarios. It's just when they get a little bit too long for me that I struggle with them. But so far, I mean, designer Matt Newman has done a great job with this game overall, and I do really enjoy. Obviously, I do enjoy it. I spend a lot of time talking and writing about it, so I wouldn't do that if it wasn't a great game. And it definitely scratches that Cthulhu mythos bug that I have. My co-host over at the Great Old Ones Gaming Podcast, Nate, asks, what are your impressions of the Marvel LCG? Fantasy Flight announced the Marvel Champions, the card game, at Gen Con 2019, and it gives players a chance to team up with the likes of Iron Man, Black Panther, Spider-Man, Captain Marvel, and I believe She-Hulk is the other hero, to defeat villains such as the Rhino and Ultron. And they have already announced the first scenario pack that will give the heroes a chance to fight the Green Goblin, one of those classic villains from the comic books. I haven't actually given the Marvel Champions a great deal of thought. I was talking about it with my friend Neil, who's a big comic book collector, really enjoys his comics, and he was even fairly lukewarm about another LCG. He has played several over the years, and as much as he likes comic books, I think he was taking a real wait-and-see attitude. I think his primary concerns were the art, which I think he is satisfied that that's going to be okay, and as well as the cooperative aspect. So he's taking a wait-and-see approach. I currently don't have any plans to pick it up and play it, but who knows? I mean, the one nice thing about that they have done with Marvel Champions is that one core set gets you everything you need to play. I know when the Arkham Horror LCG came out, if you wanted a full play set of the Investigators, you needed to purchase 3 core sets, or was it 2 or 3 core sets? I ended up buying quite a few more than that, but you did need to buy multiple core sets in order to have a full play set. That's not going to be the case with Marvel Champions, and I think a lot of players will enjoy that aspect of it. Now, as for just looking over the announcement and some of the other attributes of the game, the deck size is 40 to 50 cards, which is slightly larger than Arkham Horror LCG decks, but of course you are getting a full playset, so that won't be too much of an issue. The unlike the investigators in the Arkham Horror LCG, the heroes are going to be double-sided, which is kind of neat. You've got the one side which has the hero's alter ego, and then on the other side you will have the hero card, and the villain will interact with you depending on which of those is face up on the table. So much like the Arkham Horror LCG or even the Lord of the Rings LCG that preceded it, you'll slowly build up your hero by playing ally upgrades and events. The cards are purchased with resources, but those resources are generated by discarding cards from your hand, which is an interesting mechanic that we haven't seen before in the other cooperative LCGs. The villains begin their turn by placing threat on their scheme, which sounds very similar to the way that the Doom mechanic from the Arkham Horror LCG works. And if the villains advance their schemes too far, then the heroes will lose the game. Now, as I mentioned before, the villains will interact with the heroes depending on which side is face up. If your alter ego is face up, I believe the villains will leave you alone and pursue their schemes. So there is a risk in that. You can't stay as your alter ego too long without the villains simply steamrolling you. And then once you flip over to your hero side, the villains will take the fight to you, and you will have to defeat them in combat. So if you're worried about the villains advancing their schemes, your best bet is to flip over to your hero side. But there are probably some sort of downside to being a hero all the time. So you're going to need to find that balance between being your alter ego and a hero. Now, much like the Arkham Horror LCG or the Lord of the Rings LCG, you will also draw cards from an encounter deck, one each turn. The encounter deck contains powers, tools, and minions that the villain will use. It also includes something they're calling an obligation that is very similar to the weaknesses that you include in your Arkham Horror LCG investigator decks. This time the hero's obligation is in the encounter deck, and so at some point during the game you will have to deal with it. It will be interesting to see whether it is as debilitating as some of the weaknesses in the Arkham Horror LCG. I'm looking at you, Tower. I'm really unhappy about that one in particular. So overall, I think if you are a fan of the comic books or the movies, I think this game is probably going to be right up your alley. The designers over at FFG have slowly improved the LCG model with each iteration of the cooperative games. They started obviously with the Lord of the Rings LCG, and then they released Arkham Horror, which improved on it in some ways. Obviously, the games are quite a bit different. They're not nearly as similar as I thought they were going to be when the game was first announced, but there are improvements to streamline play and make the game a little easier to pick up. I expect them to have done the same with Marvel Champions, so that they're going to streamline the gameplay further, take out some of the, sand down some of those sharp corners that have given players trouble in the rules, and really streamline things to make it an overall a good game. So I think the game itself is going to be top notch. Whether players like myself are going to be interested in it, that I don't know. Personally, I'm not going to be picking it up on release day, but and I'm not even sure comic book fans like my friend Neil are going to flock to it. But I guess the only concern I do have about Marvel Champions is that Fantasy Flight's player pool tends to be a little it's smaller than games like Magic, and their games tend to cannibalize players from other games. I'm living proof of that because I did play a lot of the Lord of the Rings LCG prior to the release of Arkham Horror, And then once Arkham Horror came out, while I still pick up the packs for the Lord of the Rings LCG, I rarely have a chance to play. Now, some players won't won't have trouble collecting 2 LCGs. For other players, that's one LCG too many. So it will be. I'm very curious to find out whether the Arkham Horror LCG will take a hit. Whether it's player base, that is, will take a hit as some of the players go and explore the hot new thing that FFG is releasing. But and who knows? I may play it at. I'd like to play it at some point to see how similar or different it is. But Arkham Horror is my jam, so you have no worries that I'm suddenly going to become a Marvel Champions streamer. Speaking of streaming, Nate also asked me whether there are other games that I am interested in streaming. As you know, earlier this summer I did experiment with streaming some the Sinking City, the Cthulhu-related game that was released in June. I'm planning on continuing that. I would like to finish off that game and stream the results, so that will be coming. I'd also like to stream some of the other Cthulhu-related games that are out there, but they will be a lower priority than the Arkham Horror LCG. Part of the problem, obviously, is time. Time is always the enemy, and there always seems to be too little of it to go around to do all the things I would like to do, so I really have to pick and choose. And right now I'm just focused on catching up with the Arkham Horror LCG, getting all those playthroughs done, getting all of the reviews done, so we can be ready for the Dream Eaters expansion, which I am really looking forward to. But I will be streaming video games like The Sinking City from time to time. I would also love to stream at some point a Call of Cthulhu, the Call of Cthulhu RPG at some point. But that's going to take a little more planning and work to get off the ground. So who knows? Who knows? Right now, I'm just focused on catching up with Arkham Horror and getting all the playthroughs done and whatnot. And so then I can focus on doing some of the other, producing some of the other videos that players enjoy, such as the In the Know series. I know there's been a big demand for those In the Know videos, and I have several ideas for videos. I just need to sit down and write the script and whatnot. So. Hopefully once I catch up, hopefully by the end of September, I'll be able to start getting to work on some of those In the Know videos, as well as picking up and doing some more of those in the Deck Tech videos, focusing on specific investigators. That Nate has one more question, and that is, will you ever find one of Nathan's jokes funny? Nathan being my co-host over at the Great Old Ones Gaming Podcast. Absolutely, I am going to find one of his jokes funny at some point. Nathan is a great guy, and we're really enjoying working on that podcast. And he definitely brings a different perspective. He's very much into those fan-made scenarios, which I haven't touched. I simply haven't had the time to explore some of those fan-made scenarios, and so he has played a great deal of those. And I think I will start to find his jokes funny if he makes the trivia section of the podcast a little easier, and maybe even gives me a few bonus points to start things off, because my performance in the trivia section hasn't been that good. I like to think I know this game pretty well, but my performance on the trivia has been pretty poor. So good on Nathan for making the questions tough and challenging his co-hosts to think of little images in the art that we would never have guessed that were there. And speaking of the Great Old Ones gaming podcast, make sure you do check it out. We've got a Discord server, and all of the podcasts are available on all the major podcasting places. I believe it's Apple, Spotify, etc., etc., etc. So you can head over there. It's once a month, and we cover not only the Arkham Horror LCG, but some of the other Cthulhu-related games out there. Such as Delta Green, the Call of Cthulhu, and some of the other board games. And I think we will have something to talk about possibly after Arkham Knights this year with the release of, or probably demos of the Final Hour, the new Arkham Horror-related game that supposedly is a little faster than Arkham Horror has been. Arkham Horror tends to be a bit of a grind sometimes. So I think Final Hour is trying to bring to rein in that time a little bit, so you can play it quicker. That is going to do it for the August Q&A. If you would like to submit questions to the September 2019 Q&A, make sure you head over to patreon.com. Sign up. You get to at the $2 level, you get your name in at the start of all the videos. And at the $5 level, you can ask your questions. There are also $10 and $20 tiers if you would like even more rewards. I believe at the $10 tier, you'll get to do a playthrough with me online. Speaking of which, I need to arrange some playthroughs for patrons. And at the $20 level, I'll be doing some Call of Cthulhu one-shots. So if that is of interest to you in any way, make sure you head over there to Patreon, sign up, pick your tier at whatnot, and I look forward to answering questions that you may have about this game or other LCG or RPG topics. That's going to do it for this Q&A. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to head over to Patreon and sign up to become a patron of the channel. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.